The wind howled through the towering cliffs, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Below, a vast valley stretched endlessly, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Jagged rocks jutted out like the teeth of an ancient beast, warning of the peril that lay beneath. But on the very edge of this treacherous landscape, a small child sat, oblivious to the danger that surrounded him. Noah, barely a year old, had somehow ended up at the brink of the precipice. His chubby fingers gripped the rough ground, tiny, legs kicking playfully as he gazed at the misty depths below. His bright blue eyes reflected pure innocence, unaware of the mortal peril he faced. A single wrong move, and he would tumble into the abyss. High above, hidden within the thick foliage of the forest, a pair of amber eyes watched with sharp intensity. A massive wolf, her fur a mix of silver and grey, remained motionless, her gaze locked onto the child. She had been tracking this strange, unfamiliar scent for hours, something that did not belong to the wilderness. It was unusual for a scent like this to linger so far from human settlements. Wolves rarely encountered such creatures, except when men came with fire and weapons. But this one was different. This scent was weak, fragile. It did not reek of steel or smoke. It smelled of milk, warmth, and something else, helplessness. The child shifted, moving dangerously close to the edge. A small rock crumbled beneath his tiny hand, tumbling down the cliffside. His head turned slightly, as if watching it disappear. But he did not realize what it meant. His balance wavered for a moment, his body tilting forward ever so slightly. The wolf's muscles tensed. The moment the child leaned forward, the wind howled through the valley, as if whispering a warning. Noah giggled, reaching out toward the endless sky. His body tipped, and the wolf sprang into action. With a blur of motion, she closed the distance in seconds. Her powerful paws slammed into the earth as she lunged forward, her sharp instincts guiding her. The child had already begun to fall when she clamped her jaws around his soft clothing. The world seemed to hold its breath. The wolf yanked him backward, just as his tiny body crossed the point of no return. A gust of wind roared past them, carrying with it loose pebbles that cascaded into the abyss below. The cliffside crumbled slightly from where he had been sitting, vanishing into the mist. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Noah blinked in, confusion, his small hands gripping onto the thick fur of his rescuer. He had not cried, nor had he screamed. His world was simple. One moment he had been reaching for the sky, and the next he was pressed against something warm and soft. The wolf released his clothing but did not move away. She remained crouched beside him, her body tense, her golden eyes scanning his face with cautious curiosity. Noah, in return, reached out and touched her muzzle. The wolf flinched slightly, but did not retreat. The child's fingers explored the thick fur, grabbing onto it as if it were a familiar blanket. He let out a small, delighted giggle, completely unfazed by the predator before him. This reaction confused the wolf. Prey did not touch predators. Prey did not laugh. Yet this small creature showed no fear. She sniffed him carefully. There was no scent of blood, no wounds. But there was also no scent of a mother nearby. No pack. No protection. The realization sent a strange feeling through her. She had expected to find humans close, to hear the sounds of angry voices searching for their lost cub. But the air was empty. The only scent that remained was Noah's, alone and vulnerable. The rustling of the trees behind her made her ears perk up. Something was moving in the distance. Other predators were near. She turned her head sharply, scanning the forest. The sun had begun its descent behind the mountains, and soon the night would fall, bringing with it creatures that would not hesitate to devour something as weak as this child. A pack of coyotes had been stalking the area earlier. They were scavengers, smaller than wolves but dangerous in numbers. If they caught Noah alone, they would not hesitate. The wolf looked back down at the child. She had a choice to make. She could leave him here, allow nature to take its course. That was the way of the wild. Only the strong survived. But something deep inside her rebelled against the idea. She had lost pups before. She knew what it felt like to have helpless, tiny bodies taken by the unforgiving world. She had fought for them, protected them, only to have fate take them away. And now, in front of her, was another small, helpless life. One that smelled nothing, like her own kind, but one that had clung to her fur as if she was the only warmth left in the world. She sighed through her nose. Lowering her head, she nudged Noah gently. He responded by gripping her fur even tighter, as if he somehow understood that she was his only chance. With that, she turned away from the cliffside, carrying him into the depths of the forest. The night was coming, and with it, dangers Noah could not yet imagine. But for now he was no longer alone. The wolf moved swiftly through the dense forest, her paws gliding over the damp earth as she carried the fragile human cub in her jaws. Noah, still gripping her thick fur, let out a small coo, unaware of how close he had come to death only moments. Though the air was growing colder, the sun dipping lower behind the jagged cliffs. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their dark silhouettes swaying with the wind. The wolf knew these lands well, every rock, every hidden burrow, every scent carried by the shifting breeze. But never before had she carried something so foreign, so out of place. She didn't understand what had compelled her to take him. Instinct told her to leave him, to let nature do as it would. But something deeper, something old and unspoken, kept her moving forward. Noah let out a small, tired whimper. The wolf slowed, her ears twitching. He was weak, fragile. If she was going to keep him alive, she needed to find shelter, and fast. The scent of other predators lingered in the wind. Coyotes. They had been following her since she had taken the child from the cliffside. She knew they were waiting, watching. Coyotes were scavengers, but they were also opportunists. A wolf alone with a vulnerable creature was enough to spark their hunger. They wouldn't dare attack her directly, not unless they had overwhelming numbers. She lifted her head, sniffing the air again. They were close, a rustle in the underbrush. A low growl in the distance. She bared her teeth, her golden eyes flashing in the dim light. The human cub would not last the night in the open. She needed to find a place where she could keep him warm, where she could defend him if necessary. She turned sharply, moving toward a familiar path. There was a cave nearby, nestled beneath a large rock formation. It wasn't deep, but it would provide some shelter. Her pace quickened. By the time she reached the cave, darkness had fully settled over the land. The wind had picked up, howling through the trees like the distant call of spirits. The wolf padded. Inside, her sharp eyes adjusting quickly to the dim interior. The cave was small but dry, the floor covered in soft dirt and leaves. It had been abandoned for some time. No fresh scents of other animals lingered. Perfect. She gently placed Noah on the ground, her breath visible in the cold air. The child shifted slightly, his small fingers curling into the leaves beneath him. He let out a sleepy sigh but did not cry. He wasn't afraid. The wolf lay down beside him, curling her large body around him, shielding him from the cold. He instinctively burrowed against her fur, his warmth pressing into her side. She closed her eyes, her ears twitching at every distant sound outside. Tonight she would watch over him, and in the morning she would decide what to do next. Noah stirred at dawn, his small whimpers rousing the wolf from her light sleep. He was hungry. She could hear it in his tiny cries. This was a new problem. She knew how to care for her own cubs. She had nursed them, fed them, kept them warm. But this creature, this human, needed food that she did not have. She rose to her feet, stretching her muscles. She would have to hunt. The wolf stepped outside, sniffing the air. The scent of deer was faint, carried from the valley below. It would take time to track one, and she could not leave the child alone for long. Her ears flicked. The coyotes were still near. Their patience unnerved her. They had followed her all night, waiting for weakness, for an opportunity. She would have to be quick. She turned back to the cave, lowering her head toward Noah. His blue eyes blinked up at her sleepily. He was awake, but weak, his tiny hands reaching for something, anything that could provide comfort. The wolf nudged him gently, as if to reassure him. Then, with a final glance, she slipped into the shadows of the forest. She moved with practiced silence, her paws barely making a sound as she weaved through the trees. Her body was tense, every muscle coiled with anticipation. It didn't take long to find her prey. A young deer stood near a frozen stream, its ears twitching at the distant sounds of the forest. It was alone, unaware that death lurked just beyond. The trees! The wolf crouched low, her golden eyes locked onto her target. Then she leapt. The deer barely had time to react before her teeth sank into its throat. It let out a strangled cry, its body thrashing wildly before going still. The wolf exhaled, her breath fogging in the cold air. She didn't eat right away. Instead, she tore a piece of the fresh meat and turned back toward the cave. Noah would need food first. When she returned, Noah was still lying where she had left him. His tiny body was shivering, his breath uneven. The wolf lowered the meat beside him. Of course, he did not take it. She tilted her head, confused. Her cubs would have smelled the blood, would have eagerly nuzzled toward her for warmth and nourishment. But this one, he did not understand. She sniffed the air again. He was getting weaker. This would not do. With slow, careful movements, she nudged the meat toward his mouth, hoping he would take it. Noah whimpered, turning his head. The wolf's ears flicked. This was not working. She lowered her muzzle to the meat, licking at it before nudging him again. This time, something seemed to click. Noah reached out, his small fingers brushing against the food. He did not eat it, but the scent, the warmth, it was something. She sighed. She would have to find another way. For now, she curled around him again, keeping him warm. She had made her choice. She would not leave him. Whatever happened next, she would protect him. The first sign of trouble came with the snapping of a twig outside the cave. The wolf's head lifted immediately. Her ears alert. A second snap. Then a growl, not hers. She bared her teeth. The coyotes had finally grown tired of waiting. They had followed her all night, watching from the shadows. Now, with the rising sun, they had decided to strike. She stepped forward, blocking the entrance of the cave, her golden eyes blazing with fury. A pair of yellow eyes flashed in the underbrush, then another, and another. 4 coyotes emerged, their thin bodies hunched low, their movements slow and deliberate. They were testing her. The wolf growled, her tail raised high. The largest of the coyotes took a step forward, lips curling over, sharp teeth. Behind her, Noah whimpered. The wolf's growl deepened. She would not let them pass. The leader of the pack lunged. The battle had begun. The cave entrance was narrow, just wide enough for the wolf to block it with her body. Behind her, Noah lay curled in the nest of leaves and dirt, his tiny breaths uneven, his warmth pressing into the cold earth. The coyotes had been waiting for this moment. They had followed her since the night before, watching, calculating. They were thinner than she was, smaller, but what they lacked in size they made up for in numbers. 4 of them. The leader, a scarred, wiry creature with yellowed teeth, took a step forward, his head lowered, his tail flicking side to side. His dark fur bristled and his amber eyes flickered with hunger. He growled, snapping his jaws at the air, a challenge. The wolf let out a deep, rumbling snarl in response, her lips curling back to reveal gleaming fangs. She lowered herself slightly, ready to lunge. The coyotes circled. They would not rush in all at once. No, these creatures were patient. They would feint, snap, draw her attention in one direction, then attack from another. They were predators just like her. But she was a mother, and mothers did not lose. The first coyote moved fast, darting in from the right, aiming for her flank. The wolf was faster. She lunged, her massive jaws snapping shut just as the coyote tried to retreat. Her teeth sank into his shoulder, and with a violent shake, she sent him sprawling against the cold stone. A yelp of pain echoed through the cave. The others hesitated for a moment, but only a moment. The second coyote lunged. The wolf barely turned in time. Teeth raked across her side, a flash of pain cutting through her ribs. She snarled and twisted, sinking her fangs into the attacker's ear, tearing flesh as she flung him backward. The third and fourth attacked together, one from the front, one from behind. The leader snapped at her face while the fourth coyote leaped toward her hind legs. The wolf did the only thing she could. She charged forward. Instead of retreating, she barreled into the leader, knocking him off his feet. His head slammed against the stone, dazing him for just a second. But a second was all she needed. She whipped around, just as the last coyote's teeth closed in on her hind leg. Pain shot through her, but she did not fall. with a furious snarl. She turned and sank her teeth into his neck. There was a sickening crunch. The coyote let out a strangled yelp, then collapsed, kicking weakly before going still. The other three stopped. For the first time, hesitation flickered in their eyes. The wolf's fur bristled, her mouth dripping with the taste of blood. She did not look away from them, her golden eyes blazing with an unspoken message. "Come closer, and you will die." The coyotes hesitated for only a moment longer. Then, as one, they turned and fled into the trees, their bodies vanishing into the shadows. The fight was over. The wolf exhaled sharply, her muscles shaking with exhaustion. Her hind leg burned where the coyote's teeth had torn into it, and her side stung from the earlier attack. But she had won. She turned back toward the cave, limping slightly. Noah had not moved. His small round eyes stared at her from the nest of leaves. He was silent, his tiny fingers curled into his blanket. But then, he did something unexpected. He smiled. The wolf blinked. Noah reached out, his tiny hand stretching toward her, as if trying to touch her face. She hesitated, then lowered her head, slightly. His warm fingers brushed against her nose. A soft, delighted giggle escaped from his lips. The wolf's ears twitched. She had fought. She had bled. She had driven away the danger. And now, in the aftermath, this tiny creature was not afraid of her. She had killed for him, and he had accepted her. The night was long, but no more threats came. The wolf curled around Noah, keeping him pressed against her warm fur. He slept soundly, his little breaths soft and steady. Her own body ached. She had fought many battles in her life, against other predators, against the cold, against hunger. But this battle had been different. This was not just survival, this had been protection. She closed her eyes, her instincts fighting within her. She had a pack. Somewhere beyond the valley, they would be hunting, moving through the snow-covered ridges, searching for her. She could leave the child, she could turn away, return to the world she knew, but she did not move. Her golden eyes flickered toward Noah's tiny form. He had no pack, no mother, no protection. She let out a slow breath. She had made her choice the moment she pulled him away from the cliffside. She was his pack now. When the sun rose, the world was quiet. The forest, once filled with the howls of predators, had fallen into a deep, peaceful silence. Snow dusted the branches, melting as the first rays of morning light touched the earth. The wolf stood at the entrance of the cave, her body still sore from the fight. Noah lay bundled in the leaves behind her, sleeping peacefully. She watched him for a long time. Then she turned her gaze toward the forest. She needed to move. This place was no longer safe. The scent of blood would bring other predators. She padded back toward Noah, nudging him gently with her nose. He stirred, his blue eyes blinking up at her sleepily. She lowered her head and carefully lifted him in, her jaws holding him with the same gentleness she would have used for her own cub. Then, without looking back, she slipped into the forest once more. She did not know where she was going. She did not know if she would find safety, but she knew one thing for certain: she would not let him go. The forest was still. A thin mist weaved through the towering trees, the damp morning air clinging to the wolf's thick fur as she moved swiftly through the undergrowth. The weight of the child in her jaws was unfamiliar, but she adjusted with each step, carrying him as gently as she would her own cub. She had no destination, only instinct. The cave had been compromised. The scent of blood from the coyotes would attract more predators, and staying meant risking another battle she couldn't afford to fight. She needed to find shelter, food, safety. She needed to keep him alive. Noah stirred, his tiny body shifting slightly against the warmth of her fur. The wolf slowed, lowering him carefully onto a patch of soft moss beneath an ancient oak tree. She took a step back, her golden eyes scanning him. He was awake now. His blue eyes, bright and curious, blinked up at her. He was not afraid. She had expected him to cry, to shiver, to crawl away in fear. Instead, he reached out. His small hands grasped at the air, his tiny fingers stretching toward her muzzle. The wolf hesitated. This was not how prey behaved. It was not how cubs of her own kind behaved either. Wolf pups, by instinct, would huddle together for warmth, press their noses into the fur of their mother for comfort. But this human cub, he was different. Slowly, she lowered her head. Noah let out a small giggle as his fingers brushed against her nose. His touch was soft, hesitant but curious. He explored the rough texture of her fur, gripping a handful as if he belonged there. The wolf let him. A low, rumbling sound vibrated from her throat. It was not a growl, it was something else, something she had not felt in a long time. As the morning stretched on, the wolf's body grew weary. Her wounds from the coyote battle ached, but it was the gnawing hunger inside her that was the real concern. Noah was weak. She could tell by the way his movements had slowed, the way his small body shivered in the cold air. He needed food, and soon, she sniffed the air. There was water nearby. She could hear the gentle trickle of a stream just beyond the ridge. Where there was water, there was prey. But leaving Noah alone was not an option. She turned her gaze toward the child, considering. Then carefully, she lowered herself beside him. She nudged him once with her nose, then again. He let out a tiny murmur, of protest, but did not resist as she lifted him gently in her jaws once more. The wolf turned toward the scent of water and moved. The stream was shallow, winding through the rocks with a steady, soothing sound. Small fish darted beneath the surface, flashing silver in the morning light. The wolf placed Noah down carefully on the soft riverbank, ensuring he was surrounded by thick foliage. The child yawned, his tiny hands gripping a leaf, playing with it absent-mindedly. She watched him for a moment, then with one final glance toward the trees, she slipped into the water. Hunting fish was different from hunting deer or rabbits. It required patience, precision. She stood motionless, her golden eyes locked onto the rippling surface. She waited. Then a flash of movement. With lightning speed, she struck, her jaws snapping shut around a wriggling fish. The taste of fresh meat filled her mouth, but she did not eat. Not yet. She carried the fish back to Noah, dropping it beside him. He did not react the way a wolf pup would. Instead of devouring it, he stared at it, confused. He reached out, his tiny hands pressing against the cold, slippery surface. He did not understand. The wolf huffed. He would not survive this way. She leaned down, taking a small bite of the fish herself, chewing it slightly before nudging the softened piece toward him. This time something in Noah seemed to shift, the scent of food, the taste of it. His tiny fingers picked up the piece and slowly, cautiously, he placed it in his mouth. The wolf watched him closely. He chewed, messily, uncertain, but he ate. A strange sensation filled her chest. He was learning. The sun climbed higher in the sky as they continued their journey, moving deeper into the forest. The wolf carried Noah carefully, her pace steady but alert. She could feel them now. They were being watched. The predators had not given up. The scent of the coyotes had faded, but something else lingered in the air. Something bigger, a bear. The wolf's fur bristled. She knew these lands. She knew the dangers that lurked within them. And a hungry bear, just emerging from hibernation, would not hesitate to kill for food. She needed to move faster. Noah let out a small sound of discomfort as she quickened her pace, but she did not slow. The scent was getting stronger. Then a sound, a deep, rumbling growl. The wolf froze. Her ears twitched, her muscles coiling with tension. A shadow moved among the trees. Too close. She turned sharply, darting through the underbrush, her heart pounding. She had to find higher ground. Somewhere the bear could not follow. She ran. Branches snapped beneath her paws as she weaved through the thick forest, the scent of the bear growing fainter behind her. She did not stop until she reached a narrow rock ledge hidden within the cliffs. Only then did she turn back. Silence. The bear had not followed. She exhaled sharply, setting Noah down onto the rock. He yawned, stretching his small arms before curling against her fur. The wolf lowered her head, resting beside him. She had won this battle, but she knew more were coming. As the stars emerged in the sky that night, the wolf watched over the child. Beside her, He was asleep now, his small fingers curled into her thick fur. He trusted her completely. She did not understand why. She was not his kind. She was not his mother, but he did not care, and for the first time in her life she realized, neither did she. The forest was dangerous. The wild was cruel. But for this small, fragile creature, she would fight it all. She would protect him. She would be his pack, no matter what came next. She closed her golden eyes, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Tomorrow their journey would continue. But for now, he was safe. And as long as she lived, she would make sure he stayed that way. The forest stretched endlessly before them, an unforgiving sea of towering trees and unseen dangers. The wolf moved cautiously through the undergrowth, her body tense, her golden eyes scanning for movement. Each step she took was deliberate, every flick of her ear attuned to the sounds around her. Noah, bundled securely against her thick fur, had fallen into a peaceful sleep. His soft breathing tickled her skin as he nestled close, completely unaware of the peril that lurked in the shadows. The bear had been too close the night before, too close for comfort. She knew it was still out there, roaming the forest, its hunger driving it forward. She could smell its lingering scent in the wind, faint but unmistakable. The thought made her muscles tighten with unease. She had to find higher ground. The wolf navigated through the dense terrain, carefully choosing her path. She had lived in these lands long enough to know which areas were safe and which were filled with predators. She needed to find a location where the bear couldn't follow, a place with steep ridges or hidden crevices where she could shelter. Noah. Her ears twitched as she spotted a rocky plateau ahead, jutting out over the valley. It would be difficult to reach, but once they were there, she could rest without fear of being ambushed. Shifting her weight slightly, she began the climb. The ground beneath her paws grew uneven, small stones tumbling down as she ascended. Noah stirred slightly in her grasp, but he did not wake. Halfway up, she paused, her sharp eyes scanning the area below. The forest was still, silent. But silence in the wild did not always mean safety. She continued the climb, her muscles burning with the effort, but she refused to stop. If she was tired, she did not show it. A mother did not stop. A mother did not rest until her young were safe. When she finally reached the top, she stood motionless for a moment, her breaths slow and measured. This place would do. The plateau was surrounded by jagged rocks, a natural barrier against larger predators. A small overhang provided shelter, shielding them from the cold wind that swept through the valley below. She gently placed Noah onto a patch of soft moss, her body still positioned protectively over him. Then she sat back on her haunches and listened. The wild was never truly silent. The rustling of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the wind whispering secrets through the trees, all of it spoke to her in a language she had known since birth. And then beneath it all, a sound that did not belong. A low, guttural grunt. Her ears perked up immediately, her muscles tensing, the eye. It was still near. Her golden eyes flickered toward the trees below, scanning the darkness, and then she saw it. A massive shadow moved between the trees, its hulking form barely visible against the night. It was hunting, not for deer, not for small prey for them. The wolf lowered her head, her lips curling back in a silent snarl. She did not move. She did not blink. She watched as the bear sniffed the air, searching, trying to track their scent. The advantage was hers. For now, she was above it, hidden, among the rocks, her fur blending with the shadows. The bear did not yet know exactly where they were. She would not give it the chance to find out. Noah let out a small, sleepy murmur, shifting slightly in his sleep. The wolf immediately turned, nudging him gently with her nose. "Be still. Be silent." As if sensing her urgency, Noah settled. The bear moved deeper into the trees, its massive form vanishing once more. But she knew it was not gone. It would come back. And next time, it would not leave so easily. The wolf exhaled softly. She had to make a choice. She could flee deeper into the mountains, but that would be dangerous. The higher she went, the colder it would become, or she could stay and fight. Her golden eyes flickered back toward Noah. No, she would not risk him. She would not gamble his life for the sake of her pride. She had to outsmart the bear, not challenge it. She needed a plan. As dawn approached, the wolf rose to her feet, stretching her tired muscles. Noah was awake now, his bright blue eyes watching her curiously. She lowered her head, nuzzling him gently, reassuring him without words. She needed to move before the bear returned. She scouted the area, her keen eyes searching for a way down that would not lead them straight back into danger. Then she saw it. A narrow pass between the rocks, leading to a hidden ravine below. Was risky. The path was steep, and she would have to carry Noah carefully, but it was their best option. She turned back to the child, lowering herself beside him. He reached out, gripping her fur instinctively. Good. She gently lifted him once more, adjusting her grip before stepping toward the path. The descent was slow, careful. Every movement was deliberate, her paws finding stable footholds among the jagged rocks. The wind picked up, howling through the valley. Noah let out a small sound, not of fear, but of curiosity. He liked the wind. The wolf's ears twitched, but she did not slow. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the bottom of the ravine. Here, among the rocks and trees, she felt safer. The bear would not be able to follow easily. She had bought them time. Not much, but enough. As night fell once more, the wolf curled around Noah beneath the shelter of an overhanging rock. He pressed into her warmth, his small fingers tangling in her fur. She watched him closely, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She had carried him through danger. She had fought for him, and now as she lay there, she realized something else. She had chosen him, not because she had to, not because instinct demanded it, but because she wanted to. This child, this fragile, strange little creature, had become hers. She had no pack, but now she had him, and she would protect him no matter what came next. She closed her eyes, listening to the forest. The bear was still out there, but tonight they were safe, and for now, that was enough. The ravine was quiet. The wind had settled into a soft whisper through the trees, and the shadows stretched long beneath the pale glow of the rising moon. The wolf lay curled around Noah, her thick fur shielding him from the cold. She had not slept. She couldn't afford to. The bear had been too close. Though she had led them away, she knew predators did not give up so easily. Hunger made them relentless. She flicked her ears, listening. The forest had its own rhythm, and she knew how to read it. The hoot of an owl, the rustling of a small rodent, the distant chirp of crickets, all of these meant safety. It meant no greater predator lurked nearby, for now at least. She lowered her head, exhaling softly. The child shifted against her side, his tiny fingers curling into her fur. He was warm, safe, but for how long? The wolf knew this arrangement could not last forever. He was not one of her kind, and yet she could not leave him. She did not understand why. By dawn, Noah had begun to stir, letting out small, tired sounds. As he shifted against her, he did not cry, but his movements were sluggish, weak. The wolf recognized the signs. He was hungry again. She stood, stretching her limbs, her muscles aching from the weight of the past few days. She had to find food. Noah needed something more than the occasional bits of fish she had been able to offer. He needed warmth, shelter, and something substantial to eat. The wolf sniffed the air, her keen nose picking up the faint scent of life. There was something nearby. Deer. Her body tensed instinctively. A fresh kill would feed them both. She turned toward Noah. He had rolled onto his back, staring up at the trees above, his tiny hands reaching toward the golden light filtering through the branches. He did not yet understand the danger of this world. She would make sure he never had to. With one last nuzzle against his cheek, she turned and disappeared into the trees. The scent was stronger now. The wolf moved through the forest with practiced ease, each step silent as she weaved through the trees. Her golden eyes flickered with hunger, her muscles coiled with anticipation. Then she saw it, a young deer grazing near the edge of a shallow creek, alone. Perfect. She crouched low, Her body pressed against the earth. The thrill of the hunt surged. Through her veins, her instincts sharpening. She waited. Then she lunged. The deer barely had time to react before her teeth found its throat. It struggled, thrashing wildly, but she held firm. A moment later, it was over. She breathed heavily, her mouth filled with the taste of fresh blood. She had done it. This would be enough, not just for her, but for him. She tore off a small piece, carrying it carefully between her teeth as she turned back toward the ravine. She had left Noah alone for too long. The moment she stepped into the clearing, her body went rigid. Something was wrong. The air smelled different. Noah was no longer where she had left him. The wolf's eyes darted around the ravine, her heart pounding. She dropped the meat and let out a low, warning growl. Nothing moved. Then, a sound. Soft. Rustling. She turned sharply. Noah was there, just a few feet away, sitting near a patch of tall grass. He had managed to crawl, not far, but just enough. He was reaching for something. The wolf moved quickly, placing herself between Noah and whatever had drawn his attention. Then she saw it. A snake, coiled, still, waiting. A venomous predator, just inches from Noah's outstretched hand. The wolf did not hesitate. She lunged forward, snapping her jaws around the snake's body, shaking it violently before throwing it aside. It writhed for a moment, then went still. Noah let out a startled noise. The wolf turned back to him, her breath coming in sharp bursts. She had been careless. She had left him unprotected, and in that short time, danger had already found him. She lowered her head, sniffing at his tiny body, checking for any sign of injury. But he was unharmed. He looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with wonder. Then, to her shock, he laughed, a soft, joyous giggle, as if the world around him had never been dangerous at all. The wolf blinked. This small, fragile creature had nearly died, and yet he did not know fear. She let out a low sigh and lay down beside him, allowing him to crawl toward her, pressing his tiny hands against her fur. She had learned something. Today, she would never leave him alone again. The wolf did not belong here, she knew that. Her pack was out there, somewhere beyond the valley, moving through the ridges, hunting, surviving. She had not seen them in days. Would they even accept her now? She had been away too long, and yet, the idea of leaving Noah behind felt impossible. She had fought for him, bled for him. He was hers now. She curled around him as the night settled over the ravine once more. The dangers of the wild would never stop coming, but she would always be ready. A noise in the distance, not a growl, not the sound of a predator. Something different. Voices. The wolf's ears perked. She lifted her head, her eyes narrowing. Human voices, faint, far, but getting closer. Her body tensed. She had not seen another human since the night she had found Noah, and now she turned her gaze toward him, still fast asleep against her side. The voices grew louder. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but she could not take Noah with her, and she would never leave him. The wolf rose to her feet, stepping toward the edge of the ravine. She saw them, figures moving through the trees, holding strange glowing objects, searching for him, for her cub. The wolf's heart pounded. Her time with him was running out. She had to make a decision. But for the first time in her life, she did not know what to do. The voices drifted through the trees, growing louder with each passing second. The wolf stood at the edge of the ravine, her golden eyes locked onto the distant figures moving through the darkness. Humans. They were looking for something. For Noah. She could see the glow of their strange handheld lights, flickering between the trees like trapped stars. They moved cautiously, calling out in voices that carried through the night air. Noah? A name. His name. The wolf's ears flicked, her muscles tensing. She took a step back toward the child. He was still sleeping, curled against the soft earth, his small hands gripping her fur even in slumber. He did not yet know that his world was about to change. She let out a low breath, glancing between him and the approaching figures. The humans were coming, and she had to make a choice. Every part of her being told her to run, Humans were dangerous. She had lived long enough to know this truth. They carried weapons, they hunted, they destroyed the land. She had lost wolves from her pack to humans before. She had learned to avoid their kind, to vanish into the wilderness before they could find her. And yet, Noah was one of them. Not a cub, not a pup, but a creature of their world. Would they take him back? Would they protect him? Or would they fail him as they had failed him before? She did not know. And that was what made this choice unbearable. She could take him and disappear into the mountains. She could raise him as her own, keep him safe from the dangers of both man and beast. But was that truly his destiny? She looked down at him, watching his chest rise and fall with soft, steady breaths. No matter what she wanted, no matter what she had come to feel, he did not belong to the wild. She lowered her head, nuzzling his small form gently. He stirred, his blue eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. He simply looked at her, sleepy and content. Then behind her, a sharp crack, a branch snapping. She turned quickly, her body lowering into a defensive stance. The humans were closer. She could hear their footsteps now, crunching against the dry leaves. One of them spoke again, urgency in their tone. "Noah, are you out here?" Noah's head perked up slightly. The voice was familiar. A memory stirred in his small mind. He let out a soft, curious sound, and the wolf knew. This was the moment. She had to decide. The humans were nearly upon them. The wolf could see them now. Two, men and a woman, their eyes scanning the area. Their faces were filled with worry, exhaustion, and something else. Desperation. They had been searching for a long time, and then one of them saw him, a sharp intake of breath. There he is. The light flickered over Noah, casting his tiny form in a glow. His blue eyes reflected the brightness, wide and unblinking. "Noah!" One of them, the woman, rushed forward, but she stopped when she saw the wolf. She froze. Fear crossed her face. The two men behind her hesitated, gripping the long metal objects they carried. The wolf did not move. She did not bare her teeth. She did not growl. She simply stood, waiting. She felt Noah shift against her fur, his small fingers gripping her tightly, and then he looked up at her. Something in his small, innocent heart understood. He did not cry, he did not panic. Instead, he reached up and touched her muzzle one last time. A final gesture. A silent goodbye. The wolf closed her eyes briefly, pressing into his touch. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped back. One step, two steps, and then she turned. She vanished into the trees without another sound. She ran, not because she was afraid, but because she knew she could not turn back. The moment she had let Noah go, he was no longer hers. Her chest ached in a way she did not understand. The trees blurred past her as she moved, her paws hitting the earth in a steady rhythm. She climbed higher into the hills, further away from the world of men. Only when she was certain they would not follow her did she finally stop. She turned, looking back toward the distant glow of the human camp. She could see them now, lifting Noah into their arms, cradling him. He was safe, he was warm, and yet a strange feeling lingered deep within her. She had won battles for him. She had bled for him, and now he was gone. She was alone once more, but she did not regret it, not for a moment. She had done what a mother does. She had protected him, and that was all that mattered. Days passed, then weeks. The wolf wandered the ridges, her golden eyes watching the valleys below. She did not see Noah again, but she could still smell him, his scent lingering faintly in the places they had traveled together. But she knew, one day, even that would fade. And she would become nothing more than a ghost in his memory, a whisper of fur, a guardian of the past. But that was enough. She lifted her head toward the night sky, feeling the cold wind against her fur. And then she howled, a long, haunting sound, carried across the vast emptiness of the wild, not a cry of sorrow, not a call for her pack, but a farewell, a promise that no matter where he was, no matter where he went, she would always be watching. Somewhere, deep in the world of man, Noah would grow. He would hear stories of the wolf who had saved him, and even if the world forgot, he never would. The days after Noah was taken back by the humans were empty. The wolf roamed the ridges alone, her golden eyes scanning the valleys below. The scent of the child, once so familiar, had begun to fade from the places they had traveled together. But she still felt him, in the rustling of the trees, in the whisper of the wind, in the silence of the forest that had once been filled with the sounds of his soft laughter. She had never known what it meant to miss something before. Her world had always been one of instinct. She had lived for survival, for the hunt, for the call of the wild. But now there was something missing in the rhythm of her days, something she had left behind. She had made the right choice. She knew this, and yet deep inside, a part of her ached in a way she could not understand. One night, as she lay curled in the hollow of an old tree, she heard something unusual in the distance. Not the cry of an animal, not the rustling of prey in the underbrush. Laughter. Her ears perked. She lifted her head, standing slowly, her body tensed with curiosity. She followed the sound, moving through the shadows as she approached the edge of the valley. Below, where the land stretched into rolling fields, a village stood in the moonlight. Flickering lights glowed from the windows of human dens, their warmth spilling into the night. The wolf had never ventured so close to human lands before. She had no reason to. And yet, her eyes searched the tiny figures moving near one of the buildings. Then she saw him. Noah. He was older now, walking, laughing, playing. His blue eyes shone in the moonlight, his small hands reaching toward the sky. The wolf remained hidden, her golden eyes watching. She did not move closer. She did not make a sound. She only watched. He was safe. He was happy, and that was all that mattered. A part of her longed to step forward, to make her presence known, to hear the sound of his voice, calling out to her. But she did not belong in his world, not anymore. She lowered her head, exhaling softly, and then she turned and disappeared into the night. Years passed. The wolf grew older. The forest changed. The mountains remained eternal, but the world beyond them was always shifting. She had not seen Noah again, not with her eyes, but sometimes when the wind carried the scent of the village, she would pause and listen. She imagined he was still there, still growing, still remembering, and that was enough. She had become a legend among the humans. She had heard them speak of her, the ghost wolf of the valley, the guardian of the lost child. Stories spread about her. Some believed, some doubted, but Noah knew the truth and he would never forget. One winter night, as the first snowfall blanketed the earth, the wolf found herself drawn once more to the edge of the valley. She did not know why. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was something deeper. She moved slowly, her paws leaving delicate prints in the untouched snow. The village lay below, glowing softly in the winter light. And then a sound, the crunch of footsteps approaching from the other side of the ridge. The wolf's ears twitched. She turned, her breath visible in the icy air. And there, standing on the ridge just a few feet away, was Noah. He was older now. No longer a fragile infant, but a boy of 7 or 8. His golden hair was dusted with snow, his blue eyes wide with wonder. He was staring at her, and he recognized her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind howled between them, but neither one shivered. The wolf took a step forward, her golden eyes never leaving his. Noah did not run. He did not call for help. Instead, he smiled. The same way he had smiled all those years ago, when he had reached for her in the darkness. His small hands gripped the edges of his coat, his breath shaky. Then, slowly, cautiously, he lifted his hand. Not in fear, not in hesitation, but in recognition. He reached toward her, his fingers outstretched. Digi. Wolf's heart pounded. She knew she should leave. She did not belong in this world, but in this moment. She was no longer just a creature of the wild. She was his protector, She took one slow step forward, then another. Then finally, she lowered her head, and Noah's warm human fingers brushed against her muzzle. Soft, familiar, a connection that had never truly been broken. The boy let out a shaky laugh, his breath visible in the cold air. "I knew you were real," he whispered. The wolf's ears twitched. She closed her eyes briefly, savoring the warmth of his touch. She had spent years wondering if he would remember her, if the bond they had shared was only a fleeting moment in time, but now she knew some things could not be forgotten. She stepped back, her golden eyes holding his one last time. Then, as softly as she had come, she turned and disappeared into the trees. Noah stood there, watching her go. He did not chase after her. He did not call out. He simply smiled, and in his heart, he knew. Wherever she was, she would always be watching, because once upon a time, she had been more than just a wolf. She had been his guardian. Noah grew into a man. He carried the story with him. When others doubted, he only smiled because he knew the truth. The wolf had saved him once, and in a way, she had never stopped. She had taught him about courage, about survival, about love that did not need words, and even though she was gone, her spirit remained in the wind, in the trees, in the whisper of the wild. And sometimes on the coldest winter nights when the world was still, a lone howl would echo through the valley, a song carried across the mountains, and Noah would look toward the trees, his heart full, because he knew she was still there, watching, protecting, always. The night was cold, the air crisp with the first whispers of winter. The forest outside Noah's cabin stretched endlessly, bathed in silver moonlight. Snow blanketed the earth, soft and untouched, except for a single set of footprints leading up the hill. Noah, now an old man, moved slowly but steadily, his breath visible in the icy air. His steps were careful, his cane sinking slightly into the snow with each movement. He had done this walk every year, ever since he was a child. Ever since her, the wolf, the one who had saved him, the one he had never seen again. He reached the edge of the ridge, where the trees thinned and the world opened into a breathtaking view of the valley below. Here, beneath the vast sky, he had first seen her disappear into the wilderness. He stood there staring into the night, his heart filled with something he couldn't quite name. Hope, sorrow, a longing that never faded. The memories were as vivid as ever. Her golden eyes, her silver fur, the warmth of her body protecting him from the cold. How long had it been? Decades. He had spent his life wondering if she had survived, if she had raised cubs, if any part of her still roamed these lands. And now, as the wind whispered through the trees, he did what he had always done on this night. He lifted his head and howled, a deep, shaky call that echoed across the valley. A foolish thing, maybe, but it was his way of saying thank you for keeping him safe, for choosing him, for loving him in a way no human ever had. He sighed, lowering his head. She was gone. She had been gone for a long time, and yet, just as he turned to leave, he heard it, a sound that made his entire body freeze, a howl, not from his lips, from the trees. His breath caught in his throat. It was distant, yet close, deep and strong, filled with something ancient, something familiar. His heart pounded. It couldn't be, could it? He turned slowly, his old bones aching with the motion, and then he saw it, a shape emerging from the trees, a wolf, large, majestic, silver fur glowing in the moonlight, golden eyes staring straight into his. Noah's breath hitched. He felt his heart racing, felt his hands tremble. It wasn't her, it couldn't be, but it looked just like her. The wolf stood motionless, watching him, waiting. Noah swallowed hard, his throat dry. His voice, though raspy with age, was steady. "You came back." The wolf didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, so slowly, it took a step forward. Noah felt something deep inside him crack. He lowered himself onto one knee, ignoring the ache in his joints. Shakily, he reached out just like he had as a boy. The wolf hesitated. Then, mirroring the past, it took another step forward, then another, until finally it was right in front of him. Noah's heart thundered in his chest as the wolf lowered its head, its nose brushed against his palm. Warm, solid, real. A broken laugh escaped his lips. His vision blurred. "You're real," he whispered. "You're really here." The wolf let out a soft breath, warm against his skin. Then, it stepped back. Noah felt the loss immediately, but he understood. This was not a creature meant for his world, and yet, before it left, it did something he never expected. The wolf howled, loud, powerful, an answer to the one he had called out. Then, with one last look, it turned and vanished into the trees. Noah stayed there, staring into the darkness long after it was gone. He did not chase after it, he did not need to. He smiled because he knew deep in his soul the wolf had never left, and she never would. Noah's hand still tingled where the wolf's nose had touched him. Even as the creature vanished into the trees, its presence remained, a ghostly imprint on his heart, as real as the day he had first been saved. He stayed kneeling in the snow, his breath coming in slow, measured gasps. His body ached, his joints stiff from the cold, but he barely noticed. Had it really happened? Had he truly seen her again? Or had time and longing woven a dream so vivid it felt real? His heart told him the truth. It had been real. She had come back, or at least her bloodline had, a descendant perhaps, a piece of her still lingering in the world. The realization filled him with a strange, indescribable peace. She had not been forgotten by the wild. Her legacy lived on. Noah forced himself to stand gripping his cane for balance. His legs protested, but he ignored them. He had one more thing to do. He turned back toward the forest, toward the path that led home. The cabin was not far. Its small wooden frame nestled at the edge of the valley where the mountains met the trees. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, the glow of lanterns spilling warmth into the night. It was a place of safety, a place of memories. But as he walked, he noticed something strange. The wolf's tracks, large, deep imprints in the snow, were leading the same way, toward his home. His heartbeat quickened. Had it been following him all along? Or had fate simply brought them together one last time? When Noah reached the cabin, he heard the laughter before he saw them. His grandchildren, Ethan and Lily, were waiting for him on the porch, bundled in thick coats, their cheeks pink from the cold. "There you are, Grandpa," Ethan called. "Mom was about to come looking for you." Noah smiled, shaking off the snow from his boots. "I wasn't lost," he said, his voice filled with something he could not explain. "I was just remembering." Lily ran up to him, her small hands tugging at his coat. "You were at the ridge again, weren't you?" Noah nodded. "I was," Ethan grinned. "Did you see her?" Noah hesitated. Then, with a slow, deliberate nod, he whispered, "Yes." The children's eyes widened. "The wolf?" Lily gasped. Noah's smile was soft, filled with something ancient and unshakable. "She came back," he said. "Or maybe she never truly left." Ethan and Lily exchanged excited looks, their breath puffing in the cold air. "I told you she was real," Ethan said. Lily's expression grew serious. "Do you think she was watching over you this whole time?" Noah's heart swelled. Yes, he did. The children helped him inside, their excitement filling the small cabin with warmth. The fire crackled, filling the room with a golden glow. As Noah settled into his chair, Lily pressed her face. "To the window, Grandpa," she whispered. "Come look." Curious, he pushed himself up and walked to the window. His breath caught. There in the untouched snow outside the cabin were tracks, wolf tracks, leading up to the porch, then turning back toward the trees. The children looked at him, wide-eyed. "She was here," Ethan whispered. Noah swallowed hard, emotion tightening in his chest. He nodded slowly. "Yes," he murmured, "she was." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Noah sat outside on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. The stars stretched endlessly above, their cold brilliance shining down on the valley below. The tracks had faded slightly, in the wind, but he knew what he had seen. He knew who had been here. He closed his eyes, breathing in the crisp night air. Then, without thinking, he did what he had done every year since he was a boy. He tilted his head back and howled, a deep, trembling sound that carried through the trees over the ridges, through the valley where she had once saved him. A farewell, a thank you, a final call to the one who had never stopped watching over him. And this time, the answer came. A lone howl echoed in response, distant but clear, strong, timeless. The wind carried it, wrapping around him like a whisper from the past. Noah smiled, tears slipping down his wrinkled cheeks. She was still here. She had always been here, and she always would be. Years passed. Noah grew older, slower. But the story of the silver wolf never faded. His grandchildren carried it forward, telling their own children of the guardian of the wild, the one who had saved their grandfather. They never forgot, and every winter, on the coldest night of the year, a small group of them would walk to the ridge. They would stand where Noah once stood, and they would howl, a call to the past, a promise to never forget, and every time, without fail, a howl would answer. Some believed it was just the wind. Others believed it was a new wolf, carrying on the legacy of the one before. But Noah's family, they knew the truth. The bond had never been broken. The wolf was still watching and always would be.